Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. Let's paint one of the new Rohan Warriors from the War of the Rohirrim starter set. Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Baron of Dice, premium wargaming dice. Over 500 styles, over 4,000 customer reviews. Welcome to the best dice on the planet. Don't forget to check out their Lord of the Rings themed dice, including these lovely ones with horses on, and use the code Miniature Realms for 5% off. The set is up for pre-order along with loads of other miniatures, rulebooks on their own, army books, and the film is shortly with us as well. Well, at time of recording anyway. And if you haven't caught them already, check out my full review of the set, a longer form discussion on the release with my friend Dan, and the first painting tutorial, a bit like this one, but it was the Hill Tribesman. And today is the turn of a Rohan Warrior, so let's get to it. I've opted for a standard spear warrior rather than a bow or something like that, primed in black, and he's ready to go. Now the next stage, I'm going to make use of my airbrush and Vallejo Model Air, and the plan here is to give quite a nice even zenithal undercoat. And now appreciate if you don't have an airbrush, you won't be able to do this. So I'd either start with a grey spray and give it a light dry brush all over, then you can still follow these techniques quite well. Or you could go for the black and quite a heavy dry brush, maybe grey and then white, and you will get a similar effect. It won't be quite as smooth in the transitions, but you can definitely still copy the rest of the tutorial, no problems at all. I'm taking my time building these layers up quite gently with the airbrush, almost all of it top down to start with, and then I do rotate the miniature a little bit and make sure I get the white in around the sides as well. So it's not purely from one light direction, which is what zenithal really means. It means a light source from one point. We cheat a little bit. It's a wargaming miniature. You look at it from multiple different angles. But what I do want to achieve is a nice grayscale miniature where if you hold it upside down, you can see plenty of black still. We want to use all of those shadows when we're painting because we're going to do a lot of base coating using glazes, contrast style paints, and it really just aids that paint and makes it a little bit easier later on. Now I like to give my underpainting an extra punch to really work well with those contrast paints, so I'm just using a little bit of white here to gently dry brush most of the miniature, picking out that detail, and then when you add those contrast base layers it really helps. And in many ways you could leave it like that, and if you are a contrast user or you've seen the way they work, if you're able to do an underpaint like this rather than just using a plain white or grey as they were originally launched, you get so many better results by doing it this way. So I definitely recommend it, even if you don't like going on later on and doing extra highlights and all of those things, which I will be doing in this video. If you can prep a miniature like this, if you can learn how to do this, even if you only have a cheap airbrush and use it for this sense, you really can get lots of extra mileage out of your contrast style paints. And that's what he looks like after we spend a few minutes just taking the time to do that nice even underpaint. So we're going to start with two contrast paints. This is Cygor Brown and Garagax Sewer. They are both browns, but very different browns. The Cygor Brown is a deeper, warmer, reddish brown, and the Garagax Sewer is more of a mid-brown, I would call it. We're going to mix up the leather work on the miniature so they don't blend into each other. At the moment we're using the Garagax Sewer just to cover the sort of the brown clothing and some of the leather work. I'm also using it just on the inside of the shield here as well, so it's doing wood and leather all at the same time. Carry it around to this little bit of leather here that's just above the chest area, and also this little bit here that's just poking beneath the belt. Now with the Cygor Brown we're picking out all the other areas, so we've got the leather boots, we've got the leather arm guards, leather belt, a little bit of leather here under the armour just so it's separate from that lighter brown Garagax Sewer leather which is below it directly, and even the leather areas that are on the helmet. So this is Nazdrag Yellow, another contrast colour. It's a nice rich yellow that runs into the recesses really nicely and leaves the top quite thin. So as you can see we're using it on the hair here, and straight away that hair looks fantastic because you've got that bit of shadow built in with that grayscale and the dry brush we put on there. And if that was just on flat white it would still look good as well, and it might be hard to see on the camera but it just really accentuates it. Just a tiny bit of Blood Angels red here. There's only a tiny bit showing, but just to break up the colours a little bit I'm just giving a suggestion of some red clothing in between the legs there, and just a little bit on the sleeves as well. So this is Contrast Dark Angels Green, and we have a triad from two thin coats, and that's Wyvern Green, Emerald Green and Ethereal Green. The Wyvern Green matches the Dark Angels Green really well, and if you're a Citadel user you can swap the colours out for Caliban Green, Warpstone Glow and Moot Green. Now this is the Dark Angels Green, and I'm using it on the high detailed areas because it just runs into all those recesses and gives you that little highlighted look already. Now I will use it to base colour the cloak in a moment, but if you prefer to use a more traditional method, especially with the larger flatter areas, you could just go right in with that Wyvern Green or the Citadel alternatives that I mentioned. And the reason I'm using two thin coats at the moment is because, well, one, they're fantastic, and two, they just really convert well with Citadel colours. So I know there'll be lots of new people watching these videos that maybe not been to the channel before, and a lot of you will be using Citadel paints if you've come from a Games Workshop background. And I use all different types of ranges, but it definitely helps sometimes to find something a little bit more familiar. So outside of the contrast paints, most of the regular paints I'll be using in this tutorial will be two thin coats, and I will try to remember to give you the Citadel paint conversions each time. Now when using contrast paints on larger flat areas like this, I find it better to work from one area and smooth it out, allow it to run into those recesses, but also controlling it as well, trying to make sure that you get a nice smooth finish before it dries. Using the detail on the miniature as well, you see I've worked up to one of the recesses there and stopped. That way when I go and complete the rest of the cloak, I'll start again from that point and you won't get any weird tide marks. And you can see that in action now. Apologies that it's slightly out of focus, but because we've already got that one definitive line into the detail, I can build in this second part now, and you won't get any weird overlap where one half is dry and the other half is wet and you get this funny tide line. Dark Angels Green, unlike some contrast paints, doesn't run quite into the recesses by itself, so you have to keep working it quite hard here. So I'm trying to be relatively quick and move the paint around while it's still wet. You can always wet your brush and go back and just remove a little bit off the higher areas, adds a little bit of a highlight in there for you. And I'm just constantly playing with it, blending it around while it's still wet to make sure it's a nice neat finish. This is Dwarven Iron, or you can use Iron Warriors if you're using Citadel paints. And I'm just going to cover all of the metallic areas on the miniature. Nice thin coat all over. One coat's generally enough with this paint, covering over all these metal scales on the main body area. You've got the spear tip. There's lots of trim on the helmet as well. Now I'm breaking my rules already. This is Necro Gold from Scale 75. I don't have any golds from the two thin coats range. I really love these Scale 75 golds, but just use any gold that you have in your collection that you like the look of. You'll want a dull gold and one that's slightly lighter for highlighting afterwards. So using a full skin triad for the skin tones here, though there's not much skin showing on this miniature. So we have Barbarian Brawn, Dwarven Skin and Elven Skin from the two thin coats range. But if you're using Citadel, you want to be going for something like Bugman's Glow, Cadian Flesh Tone and Kislev Flesh. Like I said, very little flesh showing. Basic layering style of paint here. So the base colour first, mostly the hands. There's also a little bit of eyes showing through the grill of the helmet. Coming back with that mid-tone, really just focusing on the fingers and on the knuckles and leaving a bit of that darker tone showing in all of the recesses. Before coming back with that final touch at the top, just picking out the very tips of the knuckles and on the edge of the fingers. This is Shyish Purple contrast paint. I've just added a little bit to my wet palette and then a little bit of water as well, probably 2 parts contrast paint to 1 part water, and then I'm just adding a little bit around the cuff area, and that will look like a nice shadowed area, and then just blending it out a little bit towards the knuckles. And again, the reddish tones come out when it's quite thin, and it just gives the skin a little bit more interest. I'm just popping a little bit into the eye sockets as well. They're so small, and I'm not going to be painting eyes on this miniature. And there you see, if you want to go just the contrast route, you could stop here. I'm going to go back to that green triad we mentioned earlier on, because we're going to be highlighting the cloak and shield to start with. Now I've got all 3 on my wet palette, but I won't use any of the base colour. I've got it there just in case I made a mistake and wanted to go back and add a little bit of darkness to the mix. So what I'm doing here is focusing on the detail on the shield as quite pronounced wood grain. So I'm using the mid-tone first, just picking out the wood grain with a smallish brush, size 1 at the moment, just painting over the top of it, neat lines, and it really just starts to build up the layers. After that, we go back with that top highlight and just add slightly smaller layers, focusing around the edge a little bit more, and it just really pops. For the cloak, as I said, we've got all of those 3 colours on the wet palette. So I start with the mid-tone, focusing on the very top of the raised areas, and then just blend it out. I'm adding water to my wet palette here, keeping these colours quite thin. Otherwise you can end up with quite a streaky paint job. So I'm working from those high areas, blending down into the darker areas. If I do make a mistake and I want to dull it back down again, I've got that wyvern green, that base colour that I can use for that. But essentially what I'm doing is just slowly building up layer by layer with the same colour to start with, so increasing the thickness of that colour layer at a time, and you start to get this nice transition. So it's rinse and repeat, just taking your time to slowly build up. This is the largest surface area on the miniature, and if you can get this looking nice, it will really stand out. And when we get to that top layer, it's just much thinner lines, focusing on the very edge. So one neat thin line down each of those folds that are pointing out on the cloak. Same again on each of those folds, and then along the bottom of the cape as well. Take your time, keep the paint quite thin, keep it neat, and you'll be surprised how much it just sort of blends in with the other colours. If you have the paint too thick, you'll get this really thick, ugly line. But if you keep your paint quite thin, just draw a neat line down, you can go back again and thicken it up if you need to, adding little extra lines here or there. This is probably the hardest part of the miniature, and being the largest and flattest area, it relies on you to be neat and precise with your brushwork. So if this is not something you like to do on your miniatures, you don't want to push it to this level of highlighting, then don't. This is for your gaming. This is for your fun. So do as much as you want to, play around with it, push yourself, but don't stress about it. Now we have Sanguine Scarlet and Demon Red from the Two Thin Coats range, or Mephiston Red and Evil Sun Red if you're using Citadel. And again, that's the mid-tone and the top tone from a triad. We're just really focusing on simple layer highlighting again. We've already got the base level in there from the Contrast Blood Angels Red. So I'm just hitting the tops of those clothing folds again, and then a slightly thinner line of the Evil Sun Scarlet afterwards. This is Yellow Flame, something like Flash Kits will do really well. Just doing the one highlight on all of the hair and the beard. Remember earlier on I showed you how well that contrast Nazdrag yellow runs into the recesses and already makes it look like it's been highlighted. So I found that all I need to do, especially for a rank and file miniature like this, was to just follow all around all the detail on the miniature. You could even use the side of your brush at times on this. You could dry brush it if you wanted to as well, but they're so pronounced, the detail, for what's essentially a 28mm true scale miniature rather than the 32mm heroic that you get for 40k and Age of Sigmar and Warhammer the Old World, etc. It works really well. So this is Gizmo Fur and some Garagax Sewer. We're going to go back to that mid-tone brown. XV88 is probably the closest match on the Citadel colour range. A little bit on my wet palette. And again, I'm just going back and accentuating the highlights on all of that mid-brown, that lighter brown area. And you've already got that built in anyway because the contrast paint has flowed into those recesses where it looks darker. So I'm really just filling in the lines and accentuating what's already there and left by the contrast. Because I'm keeping the paint quite thin, I can just go around and do things like this. Just a touch here on the middle areas of the spear shaft, and it just stands out and looks like there's enough highlight there. You don't really need to do too much more. Can't see much of the shield, but I'm just going to run the brush around the edge a little bit just to pick that out. And then on the area that we can see the most, I'm just going to pick out just the first couple of strands or threads of wood there, just so there's a little bit of detail picked out, but most of it I'll just leave because it's quite shadowed and quite hidden. The smaller areas, just like this little bit of tan area under the belt and around the top on the chest area, you really don't need to add an awful lot, just a thin bit here and there. And anything that's too bright, I'm just using a little bit of contrast to tidy up. You can even thin your contrast on your wet palette and glaze it all over again if you wanted to turn it back down. This is cuirass leather and boar hide, or rhinox hide and doombull brown if you're using a Citadel contrast. I'm just using this over the Cygor brown, which was the other brown contrast paint that we started with. Again, just standard layering here because we've already got a little bit of a highlight showing because of the way the contrast paint has worked over the zenithal. We're just following the lines, the highlights you can already see there. So first of all, the rhinox hide or the cuirass leather, depending on which one you've got. And then after that, the boar hide or Doombill brown, just a slightly thinner line. It's amazing what a difference it makes, just the odd little touch highlight here, like the little area showing on the belt. And then we're on to White Star, and I'm afraid I can't in all conscience recommend a Citadel White. These are so much better, and because we were neat earlier when we were using the green on the shield, leaving the grey areas there, we can just highlight these straight over the top using the white. And here I'm just covering this top part of this white design, but I'm just going to wet blend it out, leaving it almost grey at the bottom. Continuing to break my rules with the golds on this miniature. This is Elven Gold from that same scale colour range. I'm just adding a highlight where the light is hitting really on the centre of that boss. And yeah, it seems like I've forgotten I'm breaking the rules here again as well. This is Game Air Silver. So I will be breaking the rules when it comes to metallic paints. I do like the metallic paints I use. I've used a lot over the years, and these are the best results for me. So you just want a brighter silverish colour to add a highlight to the metallics you've laid down earlier on. You've got your top of your spear, you've got the trim round the helmet, you've also got each of those little sort of leaves on the chest armour. And then we come to Grease, which is a ready mixed oil wash from the Soilworks range. If you don't use oil paints, you could use something, any sepia wash would do here. Just be a little bit careful, you only place it where you want to, maybe thin it slightly. I like to use oil washes because I find you get a little bit of a better effect. They don't pool as much as some of the regular washes do, and you can use them in other areas. I'm allowing it to run in between the grain on the shield there as well, just to add a little bit of weathering effect to it. And when they dry kind of matte and gritty as well, using the same colour on the rest of the armour. I don't want anything too dark, I don't want to dull it down and make it look too messy. You'll notice I've already got my basing texture down because I'm using the same oil paint on my bases as well, just a ready mix basing texture from Vallejo, a bit like the Sterling Mud stuff you get from Citadel. This is a fast drying thinner from AK, and I'm just using it to tidy up the oil paints. This is something that's different with oil paints to standard washes. Now, always use old brushes for applying and taking them off, but just using a little bit of clean white spirit, any pooling anywhere that I don't want that oil paint to be, I can just wipe it straight off again, and they're just so much easier to get the effect you want rather than a standard wash. And that is fully dry. I'm brushing in a little bit of pigment onto my base. I like it in the center there, and I'll blow the excess away, but it just really lifts the base, and it's super easy. There's no skill here at all, but it just looks really cool. Add some tufts there to make it suitably Land of Rohan. A little bit of Vallejo Diorama FX European thick mud, just to kind of blend it in a little bit and add a little bit more interest. Or finishing off by tidying up the edge of the base, I like to go with black. And there we are, all finished, but let's have a look at some proper pictures. So thank you again, Games Workshop, for sending me this set to get stuck into. I've really enjoyed all of the content I've made for it, and these miniatures are absolutely fantastic. I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, a huge Middle-earth strategy battle fan, and while there's not as much of it on the channel as some of the other games I've been playing more recently in the last year or so, I'm so excited to be back in building forces for this game, and this miniature was a joy to paint. There's so much more detail than the original sculpts, but they're not harder to paint at all. The detail is so crisp and it's well zoned, which means it's really easy to place your paints in certain areas and know what you should be painting. The amount of soft detail on some of those old sculpts, and they're old, they're 25 years old. Sometimes there are areas when you weren't sure what it was supposed to be. There's none of that on these miniatures. These miniatures are so nicely done that I think it's easier to paint these than it is to paint the older sculpts. So hopefully you will all have your own experience the same way as I have when you start painting your armies, and hopefully this tutorial or this video will help you in one way or another. Maybe you can pick up some tips and things from it. Let me know what you think of the miniature. Let me know what you're going to be collecting for the new edition of the game. What armies are you planning? What armies are you dusting off? Thank you very much for watching. That's the 4th video around the new War of the Rohirrim video in the last week or so. I hope you've enjoyed the painting tutorials, and if you've seen the others, I hope you've enjoyed them all. If you haven't seen them, there is a painting tutorial for a Hill Tribesman. There's an unboxing and review for the whole set, and there's also a sort of a longer review for the whole set that I recorded with my friend Dan on our Hobby Hour podcast, which also lives on this channel as well. So if you like that longer form kind of chat where we really get
into the detail around the thoughts for the game and the release as a whole, not just what's in that set as well. So do go and check those out. If you are new to the channel, you found this video because you're searching new Middle-earth strategy battle game things, do check out the other videos on the channel as well. Plenty of hobby-based stuff, loads of painting tutorials, loads of old world content, but other game systems as well. I've covered most things in my time on the channel, and there are literally hundreds and hundreds of videos. So it's well worth checking out and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. If you've enjoyed this video, please do give it a like. Please comment below, it really helps the video be seen by others. If you'd like to support the channel even further, there's loads of links in the video description to help you do that. There's dry brushes and sponging tools from Knott's Hobbies. There's an affiliate link there and a discount, and also Galeri airbrushes, again a discount available through them as well. There's an affiliate link to Warlord Games if you like your historical miniatures. There's also a link to the channel sponsor Baron of Dice as well, with a discount code to get you 5% off. I have a Patreon, of course there's a link for that as well, multiple tiers, and it's a really, really good way of supporting me and the channel continue to produce videos like this. There's also a Discord which is completely free to join. But thank you very much for watching, take care, and I'll catch you soon.